26th. Smoking June 2022. I'm Dana Durnford. I hope you're having a good day. That's possible. We had a massive 5 people on our show. Where'd that one come from? We got 4 people currently on our show, so kicking ass. We got 10 thumbs up. With a legacy of endless lies, can the perpetual the evil nuclear industry be trusted? And of course, there's only one reply: no. Why you asking? That's the way it works. You gotta ask. You got to ask. Let me see what we got here. We'll get there. I can't seem to get my name and that to pop up. That's okay. We'll do that next time. So we're going to cover Harvard University. Now, we done this 9 years ago or so, and YouTube took down my site when I was out looking for spiders last year on a research expedition. Okay, so response to earthquakes, tsunami, nuclear crisis, and 2011 videos, what we're going to cover. We're going to try to cover. It looks like I already got everything smurfed up on my end. Okay, it'll get better somewhere along the way. We had done updates and now everything is wanky. Just give me a second. I'll try to normalize something. It'll get better. This was March the 18th, 2011, Harvard University. Harvard University had 6,790 views at 15 thumbs up. Okay, and so they put out, just make sure everything lines up for me. They put out that video. We're going to go in and scrutinize it. This is one of the excerpts that you might find extremely interesting.
As every day passes, the level of radioactivity in the reactor cores declines. However, there is still sufficient activity that a fatal dose from plume exposure could still occur for a number of kilometers, perhaps 10 or more kilometers downwind. This is very weather dependent. As every day passes, the level of radioactivity...
So fatal dose is up to 10 kilometers away. Now, you might not die, he'll say later, for several weeks, but you ended up getting a fatal dose. So a fatal dose is not necessarily fatal that second, basically. Up to from the plume, but he'll also talk later about how people in the plume were getting originally a whole body x-ray, brutal x-ray, which is applicable to all the animals and birds and everything too, right? Not just humans, obviously. I looks pink. Do I obsolete optics? It's because it's 100 degrees here today, but that shouldn't matter. I think it's my lights. Since we moved into this new place, the lights have tortured me. Glowing personalities. I can't see that far, so it doesn't matter to me if you guys are stuck with it. Let me play that clip one more time, because it'd be well for that comes up.
In the reactor cores declines. However, there is still sufficient activity that a fatal dose from plume exposure could still occur.
So fatal doses from the plume exposure. This is this was actually on the 16th or 17th.
10 or more kilometers downwind.
This was on the 16th, I think, that they shot it. It showed up on their site on the 18th. And we challenged it already about 9 years ago. But because YouTube scrapped my channel when I was looking for spoilers last year, you know, the one with 24,000 subscribers, it's just prudent that we cover it again. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of these headlines, and that's all of those headlines here I'm going to cover tonight probably. Radiation around Fukushima levels where human vomits uncontrollably. That means you got a lethal dose. There was around 3,000 people died shortly after in shelters and hospitals. They try to blame it, and they're still trying to do it, blame it on having to evacuate all the stress. But we've seen hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones where up to 10 million people evacuated. We've never seen a death count that even can come close to what we've seen at Fukushima. So I got to make some quick adjustments until we get everything lined up again. Air samples in Tokyo, which is 220 kilometers away, were 270 times more contaminated with just gamma cesium, a gamma emitter. The global weapons failure peak. So they got an exceptional dose in Tokyo. Tokyo definitely should have been evacuated. Water cannons can't spray the reactors because of higher radiation levels. Helicopters couldn't go there. That was on March the 16th. March the 18th, they withdrew all workers trying to restore power. The nuclear industry made Shinzo Abe, or President Khan, force some of the victims to go back into the nuclear wasteland. It came out in 2012 that Tokyo vice governor, where they were having 270 times more radiation fallout than normal from weapons, was saying we needed a draft that all the Japanese must face it. So they're talking about a draft because like at Chernobyl, they had a draft where people went up on the roof where the graphite core had landed and were picking up pieces of the graphite core and throwing it off the building and then go home. They all got very tiny pensions. In fact, the Tetra, we were talking about Tetra River in the last show. The people evacuated they got a pension too. It was around $4 US a month is what they're getting currently. All of eastern Japan evacuated at Fukushima plant, if Fukushima plant was evacuated, abandoned rather. So all of eastern Japan evacuated. Think about, and that's what they're talking about for that radioactive fallout, lethal doses up to 10 kilometers. There's still incredible doses on the other side of the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. It's time to make a geezer suicide. Geezer is a derogatory term. Suicide squad. And they were calling for 60 and older to be prepared to die at the Fukushima plant. 60 and older. Be prepared to die at scumbag, degenerate nuclear power plant. Not nuclear scientists, not nuclear academics. We got pink again on you. I got no idea. I'll show you. I'll set the colors on this camera on my end, on the computer end. And so I'm not sure which lights are doing it. If I turn off the little lights, I got worse. It's hard to see the Geiger counter when I turn off the little lights. So now I'm going to get red. I think the reason I look pink is because I'm just really terrible with cameras and lights. I shouldn't even be allowed to own a camera, actually. I'm that terrible with this stuff. So 60 and older should prepare to die. That didn't include nuclear scientists or nuclear corporations, etc., etc. Okay, so this is an intro. It's a couple minutes long. And then the rest of it is clips. But this will help get you oriented on what we're going to cover tonight and the people. So we're going to challenge, I know how arrogant this must sound, we're going to challenge Harvard University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the entire biosphere and the entire planet, and see if they were honest, see if they were being deceptive or deceitful or disingenuous, okay? And sadly, we done this 9 years ago, so we kind of already know. Hi, everybody. When I move my arms, the tone changes. Ow. Well, while the video clip is playing, I'll try to adjust the lights here. We got 17 votes. Somebody accidentally hit yes, I guess. With a legacy of endless lies, can the perpetual, evil, despicable, disgusting nuclear industry ever be trusted? And of course, no. I move my, look at that. You can see that hue when I lift my arm up. Look at that. Good call, Dana. I probably can't fix that because I'm just incredibly terrible at this stuff. Let's play the video clip. I'll give it a try.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jennifer Leaning. I'm director of the Harvard University FXB Center for Health and Human Rights at the Harvard School of Public Health, and I teach at the School of Public Health on disasters and human rights. I will moderate today's discussion. Last Friday, March 11th, 2011, a catastrophic earthquake that struck Japan also resulted in a vast tsunami engulfing parts of Japan's coastline. That same day, a state of emergency was declared at the Fukushima nuclear power facility, which has subsequently experienced several explosions and fires. More than 3,600 people are confirmed dead, and thousands more are still missing. Large numbers of people have been evacuated from the disaster area, including surrounding the nuclear power plants as a disaster zone, and are reported to be in dire need of food and water and other supplies. Radiation releases from the nuclear power plants are continuing. This combination of crises is absolutely unprecedented. This forum will examine the response to the earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear crisis in Japan, disaster leadership in action. I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists for today. They will speak in the order that I am introducing them. After they speak, and after the panel has had a chance to talk and ask questions among themselves, we will open the floor for questions from the audience. Dr. Mike VanRooyen is an associate professor at the Harvard School of Public Health and at Harvard Medical School. He is a practicing emergency physician at Brigham and Women's Hospital and the director of the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. Dr. Gordon Thompson is a plasma physicist and is the executive director of the Institute for Resource and Security Studies here in Cambridge.
He's a nuke tart.
He is an expert in issues of nuclear radiation from nuclear power plant disasters. Professor Michael Reich is the Taro Takimi Professor of International Health Policy in the Department of Global Health and Population here at the Harvard School of Public Health. And he is an authority on the political and social issues in Japan and has particular expertise in Japanese experience with disasters. And joining us on the line from Tokyo is Dr. Takashi Nagata.
Okay, so just rewind it a little bit. Gordon Thomas, he's the nuclear expert, and we just played a clip earlier of him. And so most of it will be him, and then they're getting questions from the audience at the very end of it. Yeah, I can change my color by lifting my arms. This is amazing technology, isn't it? then I don't think that's what's supposed to happen. Well, nothing I can do about it while the show's live. We'll deal with it next time. Because if I try to lighten it up, yeah, not sure what's going on. It was 100 degrees here today, and I couldn't hang out in the studio. Well, I hung out in the studio where I chopped up the whole video and got out. Let's get after it anyway.
Thank you, Dr. Leaning. I'll speak about the nuclear part of the emergency, focusing on the Fukushima Daiichi plant, number 1 station. This station has 6 operating nuclear power plants and 2 under construction. Of the 6 operational plants, 3 were operating at the time of the earthquake, and 3 were under planned maintenance. The entire station is in a situation called station blackout, where normal electricity supplies have been lost. The cores of the 3 reactors that were operating are all damaged. The reactor buildings in each case are damaged, and the containment vessels in 2 of those plants are damaged. Unit number 4 has damage to its reactor building and to the spent fuel pool, where fuel was removed from the reactor for maintenance purposes.
Oh, and decades of reactor cores are stored in the fuel pool also?
Releases up to now have been relatively small.
Okay, so he's claiming the releases are small. Releases are unfortunately not small. Bear with me. Now, the fuel pools, just to get anybody, are at the very top of these buildings. To your left, you can see the remains of reactor 3. From that side, here's another look of reactor. So when he was saying releases are small, when Gordo was saying reactor releases are small, maybe I think I might be able to figure it out. So that's the remains of reactor 3. This was a mixed oxide fuel. The fuel pools are gone, the reactor core is gone, but he said, let's say Harvard. Harvard says very small releases. So you can see the remains of reactor 4 over there. These were 190-foot buildings, 150 feet wide. So that's their first lie. Let me see if I can fix anything. So maybe the colors would be more stable. No. Maybe I got. That's the way it goes. Let's keep it rolling here.
However, the potential exists for a much larger release.
Potentials exist for a much larger release. Well, actually, it does at other reactors at the same site. But these 2 have basically released 40 years of inventory. Chernobyl was a 200-ton reactor. It was brand new with no fuel pools. These are 40 years old with 2 fuel pools at the top of each building. And you can see both depictions here in the red. And the reactor cores were 720 tons compared to Chernobyl's 200 tons. And that Fukushima reactors were pure uranium plutonium weapons grade, whereas Chernobyl was graphite, where they put fuel rods into it. It's much more volatile at Chernobyl. It's been said by Russia media they were equal to 100 Chernobyls each. So saying that, small releases.
However, the potential exists for a much larger release.
So he's not acknowledging those buildings were destroyed. Now, this is Harvard University. If they didn't know, who would know, right? And You can see by his demeanor, he's very calculating for each word he's using.
This potential will exist for days to come and perhaps weeks to come until the reactors are fully stabilized and made safe. If a large release occurs, it will take the form of an atmospheric plume which travels downwind. The way in which this causes harm to people is, firstly, as the plume passes overhead, people receive radiation, whole body radiation equivalent to X-rays from the passing cloud. Also,
So that's an amazing statement that people received a whole body X-ray from the clouds.
radioactive material is deposited on the ground and other surfaces.
So you get this whole X-ray type effect. Then you also got it on the ground and the X-ray is caused by alphas and neutrons and betas and gamma emitters. They pulse energy almost at the speed of light, and so there's this breaking effect almost at the speed of light because they don't mix. Right, the alphas, neutrons, betas, and gammas are their own frequencies. They're almost the speed of light at 186,000 miles per second. So they hit each other, they change, they create an X-ray effect. And so when it's underground in particular, it sterilizes all the forests of bacteria and fungus. And of course, all the species are sterilized at the same time. So a really effective way of extermination.
And people remaining in that location are further exposed. In addition, if a person inhales material from the passing cloud, they're subject to internal irradiation, and the thyroid gland is a notable example of that.
Now, gamma likes to get, so does other species, isotopes. Gamma likes to, this model is of a xenon radioactive fallout. So everybody in the northern hemisphere and every species was sucking it in. He doesn't acknowledge that at that stage. He had to know this is how it works because he knows everything else apparently.
The actions that one can take to protect oneself are to evacuate, that is to get beyond the reach of the plume, to shelter if the plume passes, and if the plume is passing, to have some form of respiratory protection. Even a towel, a wet towel, will be a major protection in that case.
Now, I was just going to stop him for a second. Because you mentioned the thyroid earlier, and then a lot of the iodines, you'll notice over when you follow this topic, they'll talk about the iodine is very susceptible to, or the thyroid gland. And what that does is it takes potassium and stuff and makes it into hormones. Because iodine acts like potassium, but this is man-made anthropogenic iodine we're talking about. And because it was 220 million atoms of the iodine 129 per liter rainfall in an Ottawa study here in Canada, and this is sustained for weeks. And it remind you of that xenon model I showed you just now. The insects and birds and animals and mammals and humans' thyroid glands are saturated by these types of numbers. And there's another study with 20 million atoms of iodine 131 per liter. But cesium will also, is a gamma, will end up. Well, iodine is 90% or 10% gamma, actually, I think, is it? I can't remember. Because it changes in its half-lives to its. And so the thyroid gland will turn the iodine into radioactive hormones and distribute that out. And it'll do it to newborns, animals and birds and insects and humans too, right? So it's a very sneaky, it's a biological weapon is how these isotopes were described in the 50s by physicians.
And to protect the thyroid gland, take potassium iodide.
And so the thyroid is still going to go somewhere else, right? There's pituitary gland. There's all kinds of glands that are attracted. But it'll end up in the organs, sequestering the organs and the muscles, and a lot of it will certainly end up in the bones. Like the xenon will eventually end up in the bones after it burns a hole through the species' lungs.
It's not clear if any of these steps are going to be needed over the coming days and weeks.
So now he's claiming that, what he's claiming is there's no releases that would warrant protective measures. That's an incredible statement. That's another, my goodness, come on, Harvard, don't destroy Earth for the nuclear industry. So this particular part of the model right there is, where my finger's to is the Atlantic Ocean. This is 19-day model, by the way, of radioactive fallout. There's no way that he didn't know the buildings were destroyed, because that was that had showed up in the media. This is Harvard University, folks. But look at his meter. He's generally always looking down at the ground. And so the other people are there as a distraction to this guy. He's the main guy.
If these steps do need to be taken, they'll have to be taken very quickly, because a release could occur with very little warning, and then
it could occur with very little warning, but did occur. And the fuel pools and decades of reactor cores are gone.
If these steps do need to be taken, they'll have to be taken very quickly, because a release could occur with very little warning, and then, depending on the wind speed and direction, people could be quickly exposed.
San Diego, Pete, no, it was a kidney stone. And then we found out we got a great big mass in there that got to get dealt with. We got DCA on the way. It's in Montreal yesterday on the way here.
Doses at the site boundary have varied dramatically. At 1100 hours local time, on the 16th, that is today, the dose rate at the site boundary was about 340 millirems per hour. That's a relatively modest dose. Higher doses have been observed. You'll see on the slide available here an explanation of doses. This is a relatively complex matter. I hope we can keep that up during the dialogue to show people. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon.
Well, the Japanese are metric, and that's why they use sieverts. So does most of the world now, by the way. And so rims and rems and millirems are what the Americans were using, but that was outdated because everybody had switched to sieverts by this time. So that's not an honest statement either. And so we got some little blurps from the other.
And it's creating also psychological crises. One of the natures of nuclear disaster is that it is an invisible contamination. You can't see it, and you can't perceive it. It's not tangible. And that has to be seen in the context of Japan's history as the only country in the world that has suffered the tragedies of nuclear bombs, two nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So managing all of these different crises at the same time would be a difficult challenge for any government.
Well, like, the government doesn't explain that to the people. That's why it's a challenge, because the challenge is how do we get them to do what we want them to do without damaging the nuclear industry, basically. So this was reactor 3 at that time. That picture was available at that time. That's the original picture. And so there's no way Gordo didn't know that the entire inventory, this was the mixed oxide fuel reactor number 3. This is 1 billion times worse than the other reactors.
One of the things that has happened with this disaster and in previous history is a lack of trust that is spreading in Japan, both with regard to the government as well as with regard to the company that was responsible for the power plants, the Tokyo Electric Power Company.
Well, as for lack of trust, that never stopped. I got an interesting way of explaining that to you. Here we go. They're still lying, right? So they came out and pretended for the next several years, starting in 2013, that the building to the right was reactor 4 instead of the actual remains of reactor 4 to your left. So what? Like, they never stopped lying, and of course we covered the lies over the years, and it never. And then we cover the most recent news at the same time. The lies never stop. They simply never stop.
Oh, if we could turn to Dr. Nagata.
Now, Dr. Nagata, for all intents and purposes, was useless.
And
now the audio is terrible, so there's very little of it, so let's play it anyway.
honestly, many people try to go inside Iraq City to send water, supply, and medication, but they hesitate to go inside because they have fear that once they go inside Iraq City, they are exposed to radiation, or they might be contaminated with radiation. It is not true.
Now, if 100, he said it's not true that Iwaki was contaminated. Now, Iwaki had a 500,000 people because a lot of people evacuated there too, right? And a lot of Iwaki today is too radioactive to live in. So he allegedly went there. So for him to say it wasn't true, that's reprehensible. He should lose his degree for doing that.
The present situation or present radiation level inside Iraq City is just around 2 microsievert per hour.
This is comparable with normal, everyday, stupid background radiation?
It's very small. It's very small.
That's simply not true, folks. And so he's 100%, whenever you hear him, first off, you're quite a ways away from Fukushima nuclear meltdown. And so you should be talking in that distance in atomic decays, Becquerels, which identifies the plume, right? X-rays are more for microsieverts and millisieverts and unisieverts. So Harvard let him. Now Harvard should be correcting this guy and say, "Wait a second, that's not true. They had a massive plume release." See, but Harvard doesn't do that. Harvard got a bunch of people together with distractions like him to perpetrate a deception right from the get-go, and we covered this 9 years ago.
In the public announcement, finally, I mentioned that Takashi Nagata will go back to Iraq City as soon as...
Right, we will go back, because he was there and he left because he wanted to go have a press conference. But as a doctor, how can you just leave to go do a press conference when you got so many victims?
As possible.
Okay, here we go again.
About radiation, risk communication, and what happens next. What do you say about the challenges facing the local humanitarians like Dr. Nagata? What are the challenges they're facing, and what is the role that good information about radiation might actually play?
Okay.
I think that the logistical issues are complicated by the perception that there is significant...
This guy is an actual weasel, but he's no use in this. He seems more of a distraction than anything else.
Radiation risk. I
He's a very educated, well-placed distraction.
believe that those perceptions can be addressed, I think, fairly clearly, and need to be addressed fairly clearly in order to encourage people to move through the area and distribute goods and services.
Let's keep it rolling.
Gordon, this problem of command and control, the risk communication
So Gord is the nuclear expert.
issue.
Right, everything else is built around him. This is a house of
You
cards.
can hear how it's being played out in what Takashi reported and what you and Michael were both anticipating here. What are you seeing as the responsibility of the nuclear power plant authorities and perhaps the government?
Well, it's very important for the authorities in general to give clear and consistent statements. If emergency response is necessary, it's important that it be taken rapidly and in a coherent manner.
Again, right, there's zero possibility that he didn't know this is what the site looked like, because this is what it looked like the day before, the 15th, Reactor 3 detonated. Reactor 4 had already detonated, lost its inventory. Its reactor cores were stored in the pool. They're all gone. Reactor 3 was running. You can see that went off like a firecracker, left just a stump there. So that's pretty
Populations
upsetting.
should evacuate, others should shelter. The authorities, if they're on top of the situation, are in a position to make that recommendation. In order for the recommendations to be followed, people need to trust the statements that are made.
First off, you're a lunatic. If you're working for this industry, you don't get the job unless you're a lunatic. You can't trust their statement. It's simply... And look, we can't trust Harvard's statements and presentations and panels and lecturers. Then that's the end of... Even in North America, we simply can't trust these people. This whole presentation is about spinning you a lie into thinking the nuclear industry was able to withstand a massive onslaught. It's just heartbreaking. You don't have a functional university that you can trust. What does that say about our society? And this is true for every country. We've been covering this for a very long time.
But we're all familiar with the reports now of the French government suggesting that its nationals leave, or at least go south towards Tokyo and perhaps leave. The United States is not suggesting that, but
it was many countries, Sweden, also Canada, move out of the region.
Is urging U.S. Citizens and personnel not to go to Japan at the moment. There's been the redeployment around to the west of the U.S. Ships that are helping with the resupply out of the concern of radiation.
Operation Tamagotchi, the digital back, by then most people had digital wristwatches. All the sailors' watches had stopped almost at the same time, within a couple of minutes of each other. And they were laughing about it. And then it was snowing, but it wasn't snow, it was radioactive fallout. And they were denied any kind of relief. And there was like 14 American ships. The USS Ronald Reagan was within 1 kilometer of the ongoing nuclear meltdown.
Gordon, do you think that there should be an evacuation order that is a little bit wider than the 20-kilometer radius? Do you think at the moment we just don't know enough to make any further recommendations?
Well, this model is a 19-day model in the bottom right-hand corner. The model at the top of the screen was after 36 hours. So the model up in the top corner was 136 or 36 hours after a day and a half after detonation. Japan was covered, most of Japan was, you can see up in that model, is covered in a plume. This model is 19 days, 468 hours. And ignore what the numbers are. Think about the model, because they didn't put in the loss of the inventories in those models. So when they have a number on the model, that's not going to be an accurate number.
I think we don't know enough to make that particular recommendation.
Well, they do.
If people are at some distance from the site and they're able to move much further away, perhaps to stay with relatives at a far distance, then it's entirely appropriate that they should do so.
Think of the way you just framed that. It's entirely appropriate that they do. Far away, right? Yeah, he should, like, he didn't, he knows it's murder what he's doing. You can tell that, right? Like, if you're looking at body language, this guy screams guilty conscience at this point. Let me finish that.
Within the first few tens of kilometers of the site, there's been significant damage to transport infrastructure. So it's not clear from this vantage point what is the appropriate recommendation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, yeah, the tsunami came through, it didn't just come through the nuclear plant, right? It came through the communities. I'll show you what I mean by that, right? So it came through the plant. That's the Fukushima site itself. But it left 680 kilometers looking like this. Now, I put in the smoke and the fire just to try to bring it to life. But the red numbers on this model to the right are people that died, or actual founder bodies. The yellow numbers are people that were missing. And so originally that tsunami, you can imagine, if you were on the ground when that thing came flying through, unfortunately, that was the end of that person, obviously, right? Let's play this little clip. And you can listen to the reporter's voice coming up, where she's translating from Japanese to English. You can hear her voice just...
The Japanese Prime Minister appeared on TV to put into play a plan they'd rehearsed for years.
We will secure the safety of the people of Japan, and in order to minimize the damage, the government will make every effort possible. And we ask the people of Japan to continue to be cautious and vigilant and keep tuned in to the reports on the television and radio. And we ask the people of Japan to act calmly.
While that was all happening in the northeast of Japan, Tokyo, the capital...
So, let's get back into this Harvard. We're covering Harvard University, if you happen to be joining us. We have a stunning 18 people on the show. And we got a poll tonight. Will a legacy of endless lies, can a perpetually evil nuclear industry ever be trusted? We have 32 votes with 18 people on our show, 27 likes, and 91% of the people got it right. You can't trust evil.
Could we have the slide back up? I know it means we won't get to see Takashi for a moment, but could we bring that slide back up that has the conversion rates from rads and rems to milli and microsieverts? This is a slide that Gordon Thompson prepared for us, and it underscores in our collective view this problem of the mystery. Because, Gordon, do you want to walk us through it here about Japan is using these tiny units of radiation, whereas we in the United States, those of us who think about massive nuclear catastrophes, we're using the bigger measures of rads and rems.
Yes, well, the situation's further complicated because in Japan, the standard international units, the metric-based units, are used, whereas in the United States, we're familiar with an older system of units. We talk about REMs of effective dose, whereas the standard international unit is the sievert. But you're right in that, speaking in terms of microsieverts per hour, which is a unit that the Japanese authorities are using, is inappropriate because that's the sort of unit that's appropriate for routine operation and routine releases.
Medical imaging.
Medical imaging or routine operation of a nuclear facility. But in an emergency situation, those units are far too small to be appropriate. And in the US context, we think of REM, and I assume in the Japanese context, people would think of sievert. The fatal dose from whole body exposure, median dose is around 350, 400 REM, or 3.5 to 4 sievert.
Delivered pretty quickly.
Delivered over a period of hours, but in that case, death would follow over subsequent weeks.
So 3 to 4 sieverts in that environment, it means you're going to die a couple of weeks later because your organs will start to melt. That's if you're just there for a short exposure. If you get 20 minutes of this, you'll die that day. That's quite the statement, right? Let me play that again, that part again.
Could we have the slide back up? I know it
is inappropriate because that's the sort of unit that's appropriate for routine operation and routine releases.
Medical imaging.
Medical imaging or routine operation of a nuclear facility. But in an emergency situation, those units are far too small to be appropriate.
Okay, I just want to cut the video right there.
And in the US context, we think of REM, and I assume in the Japanese context, people would think of sievert. The fatal dose from whole body exposure, median dose is around 350, 400 REM, or 3.5 to 4 sievert.
Delivered pretty quickly.
Delivered over a period of hours, but in that case, death would follow over subsequent weeks.
This is the backside from the ocean view of reactor 3 and 4. And the other side is looking, this other picture is looking in. So that's from the ocean side looking in, and this is from the inside looking out of reactor 3 and 4. Those pictures were available to Harvard University at the time of that presentation. And so they blatantly deceived the population, for sure.
And I might just add that some people, to the lay public as well as, I'm the medical lay public, I guess, and thinking of intervening or being part of this relief effort, I would want to know things in very common parlance. So, like, for example, the exposure that I am getting, is it equivalent to a CAT scan? Is it equivalent to an X-ray? What's
And so that's not how you should perceive radioactive fallout. The way you should perceive that kind of fallout, because that's like with a beam like gamma shine X-rays or neutron beam burst. We're talking about radioactive fallout. So you're talking about physical atoms, and when it gets in your body, it'll bind itself and what's known as sequestering in your muscles, your organs, and your bones. Once it lodges into these places, it's pulsing energy at the speed of light almost every second, whether it's gamma, alpha, neutrons, or beta. It's going to be pulsing all this energy. So your DNA is being destroyed, your chromosomes are destroyed, minimum, right? Just for weak emitters. And for the rest of your life, this is happening. Your body attacks that with white blood cells immediately. So the white blood cells reduce. In order to have white blood cells, you have to get rid of red blood cells that carries oxygen and nutrition throughout your body. So there's a real cause and effect. So the more you get in you, the more white blood cells you're going to produce. That's significant because you have less oxygen, right? Also. And ultimately, it's called leukemia. So to try to paint it, I disrespect him for doing that. That wasn't an accident.
The sort of dose equivalency, if it makes sense to talk about it that way.
No, it doesn't, and you know that. And so does Gordo. He should have, a.k.a. Gordon Thompson. But Gordon Thompson, in a real panel, would have said, hey, he would have repeated what I repeated. Right? There's a significant difference.
Just because it's a frame of reference that we have around radiation.
No, it's propaganda for 70-something years, that frame of reference. And now he's not a nuclear expert, so he shouldn't be ejecting it. But Gordo can't say that. He can only sit there and ignore it. He has to. That's his job, is to ignore it. This is 100% scripted.
In common, sort of common language. And if we can talk about it that way, in terms of exposure, it might help.
But that's what the nuclear apologist would say to you, is exactly those words that he's doing now. He should get a longer nose for doing that.
Reassure us that there is exposure, and that it's fairly, either it's minute exposure or it's very important.
Like, first off, Gordo's supposed to cut him off. Like, there's no way it was a minor exposure. It wasn't in all the media because it was minor. They weren't evacuating 20 miles out because it was minor. I think it's just such a degenerate thing to do for a job, such a revolting thing to do for your job. Your job is to destroy countless billions of creatures and animals and humans so you can keep your job at Harvard University. Your job is to go out and lie. You're obviously highly educated. Why not go get a real job? Why degrade your family's name and your children's pedigree by being a despicable scumbag like that?
I might just add that some people, to the lay public as well as, I'm the medical lay public, I guess, and thinking of intervening or being part of this relief effort, I would want to know things in very common parlance. So, like, for example, the exposure that I am getting, is it equivalent to a CAT scan? Is it equivalent to an X-ray? What's the sort of dose equivalency, if it makes sense to talk about it that way?
What are you laughing for?
It's a frame of reference that we have around radiation in common,
what's funny about
sort of
it
common
in the first
language.
place?
And if we can talk about it that way, in terms of exposure, it might help reassure us that there is exposure, and that it's fairly, either it's minute exposure or it's very important.
No, why would you make up something rather than tell the truth? You really think that you're the only smart person on the planet? You lose faith in humanity when you see people like him do stuff like that. It's a sadistic, heartless, it's really truly a heartless thing to do, is to be that deceptive and deceitful and dishonest. There's no need to be that evil. Go get a real job. You don't have to keep that job. You're not a prisoner at Harvard University.
Perhaps I could speak to that, Jennifer?
Yes, please.
You'll see at the bottom of this slide, there's a statement that the background dose in the United States to a typical person is around 6.2 millisievert per year, or 620 millirem per year.
Right, and because they conflate it, they're trying to claim that potassium, which everything got in its body, is an emitter. And this wasn't cooked up a long time ago, this scheme, where then you can equate man-made anthropogenic radiation with natural, harmless, stupid, everyday part of, like, so the best way to think about it is that the stuff from the reactors is not produced by the sun. The stuff that we're made of is produced by the sun. So we could call them man-made elements, is because they're unique, right? And so your body and the animals and insects and species worldwide don't have an autoimmune trigger to recognize it and deal with it appropriately. It's a foreign entity, and so your body's flooded with white blood cells, which doesn't. It's such a despicable thing, dishonest thing to do.
That's background in the sense that it combines naturally occurring radiation exposure with medical exposure.
You can't, like if I breathe in man-made radiation, pre-nuclear industry, there's nothing comparable to it. So like, here's the way the American government describes man-made radiation, that it's a billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Industrial poison is refined poison. It's still not natural, see? So Harvard hates humanity.
It was actually gone up in recent years due to use
species.
of CAT scans and such like. It used to be
These
a
are
rather smaller
beams,
number. But that's...
Right? So X-ray, you turn it on, you turn it off. CAT scans, you're turning it on, you're turning it off. It's an actual physical beam. The atoms, when you sequester it through food, water, or air, these are in your body for the rest of your life, pulsing energy every second for the rest of your life. There's no off switch, right? There's no way that a nuclear scientist like Gordo should be conflating them together.
Gives you a comparison with the levels I was just talking about. So now 6.2 millisievert per year. Fatal range, 3 sievert and up.
Right, so the radioactive fallout, my Geiger counter up there is counting physical atoms and pulses of energy. And these will happen every second forever, right? You notice that the numbers have dropped down quite a bit in this new place because everything is new. It's new walls, new ceilings, new floors throughout the whole place here. So the other place had pre-Fukushima. So whatever radiation came into the building was embedded everywhere, where this has all fresh construction. So the numbers are a bit lower. Pre-Fukushima, that was an evacuation zone, 190 counts a minute. That was considered an evacuation zone. So these people at Harvard University they're incredibly educated people. They can easily get a real job where they don't have to be monsters. So why are they being monsters? My glass got a crack in it. Water's running down and onto the floor. There's a puddle of water starting to gather up on the floor there. How long is this next clip? That's 45 seconds. I'm going to have to get rid of this glass and get... let's keep going.
Michael.
So just to reiterate.
Now, because when they changed, because there's an external microphone, but it looks like it pointed at them, or where it's on their lapel, maybe when they turn their head, the audio volumes rises and falls. Actually, I think is what's going on. And so when you hear the sound adjusting, a lot of times that's me. But if they turn their head back, then their sound will get too loud again. So I'm adjusting that typically in real time on my end. So I apologize. That's just the way it is.
My previous points, I think that this kind of communication ought to be something that your grandmother would understand. So the area that was affected is an area with a high proportion of elderly people, high proportion of fishermen, farmers, and the communication from the government and from the company ought to be in terms that are readily understandable, consistent, on a regular basis. Like maybe there should be a 9 o'clock report every day. That's an update that's directed at people so that they can understand it in their own terms.
Now, he shouldn't be in the conversation. He's a pawn.
Trust.
Well, thank you. You will now be put to the test by questions from our panel, questions from our audience to the panel.
Now, her last name is Learning, the same way you spell learn, right? This is an interesting name to have as a professor, and of course, like, I have a folder there on professors and doctors that committed crimes, and lots of Hanford, Harvard, not Hanford. Hanford's not a school, Dana. I know. Just give me a second. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Oxford, MIT. There's an incredible amount of professors that have murdered their wives, raped babies, defrauded institutions of large amounts of money. It was just shocking how many of them were pedophiles, wasn't it? So the audience is going to ask questions. So the lady in the front row to your left got an interesting question.
Please. Then I've got you.
I have a question about the radiation releases that have been reported to date. My understanding is that we have...
Hang on. So, remember I showed you pictures earlier, the buildings destroyed, and said they're where the buildings are destroyed, right? And I've done that over and over, but if you're just joining us, you're not familiar with that part of it. Now, she's in the audience. She's going to ask him about these destroyed buildings. And so we're going to get some answers that we didn't get out of the presentation, which is really interesting, I think.
Have spent few...
It's obviously that these people are part of the school, right? These are not just random people walked in off the street because there was a presentation. These are part of the faculty or the school itself.
Fuel pools where the
So they're talking about the fuel pool at the top of the buildings.
Coolant has dropped and the spent fuel rods are exposed.
So the instant reaction for the nuclear academics should be, well, if the fuel rods are exposed, then the zirconium cladding will flash, which will burn at around 1600 degrees. That'll ignite the pellets of uranium, plutonium inside of it. And that's the chain reaction going on now also in the fuel pool. I'm going to start, I'll shut up and just let this play out. And I'll just start it again because I was chattery.
Please. Then I've got you.
I have a question about the radiation releases that have been reported to date. My understanding is that we have spent fuel pools where the coolant has dropped and the spent fuel rods are exposed, or maybe even on fire. And you've got buildings that have lost their roofs. There have been explosions and buildings are open to the elements, so rain is coming down into these reactor buildings. Birds are flying around. Who knows what's going on? And yet this morning someone said on the radio on NPR that the radiation was similar to what you get background radiation for a month. So it didn't seem to make sense to me. And I'm just wondering, how could you have exposed spent fuel rods, fires in the containment buildings, loss of roofs and ceilings and exposure, and not have higher radiation releases?
Yes, I think that is a question a lot of people have. Thank you for asking it.
Right, so she's obviously, like I've been telling you, so that's reactor 1, it blew up and caught fire and blew up and then caught fire and blew up, not necessarily in that order. Reactor 2 also done the same thing. It detonated, it caught fire, it burnt continuously for several days. Reactor 3 done the same thing. It caught fire and blew up and blew up and caught fire and blew up. And then reactor 4 done the same thing and then the next day they done this presentation. So there was zero possibility that they didn't know these reactors had lost their inventory. It was zero. It was zilch. There was no way that these incredibly privileged and educated professional lawyers didn't understand. And so it was her job to introduce, she's driving to work, and how can that be like a banana or natural radiation, right?
So
I think that goes to you, sir.
okay. There are at least two questions there. Firstly, units 1 through 3 are suffering core damage, accidents, and perhaps spent fuel pool accidents as well. The spent fuel pool is located at the top of the reactor building, which in each case is damaged. Units 1 and 3, in fact, destroyed at that location.
Okay, so now let's play that again, where now he admits they're destroyed, the fuel pools, but it doesn't acknowledge reactor 2. Let's play that again.
So
I think that goes to you, sir.
okay. There are at least two questions there. Firstly, units 1 through 3 are suffering core damage, accidents, and perhaps spent fuel pool accidents as well. The spent fuel pool is located at the top of the reactor building.
Well, that's really interesting that he didn't mention this earlier. By the way, I'll show you a picture of what reactor 3 looked like a couple of years later. There was nothing left of the building when they tore away. And now they've done the same thing with reactor 4. And the fuel pools are at the top of the building. That's what you're seeing in those two red depictions. That's the so-called top of the building. So what I think is going on with the color now, because we talked about that all night now, is I'm a wuss. And so I got the lights turned down too low and the lights are too far away from me. But what happens is if you turn the lights up a little bit more, I won't be able to see the screens. I'm sitting here the whole time. Like, you can't even blink because the lights are so...
which in each case is damaged. Units 1 and 3, in fact, destroyed at that location.
So unit 1, 2, and 3, but not reactor 4. So he's saying reactor 1, reactor 2, and reactor 3, the cores are damaged and the fuel pools, or the buildings are destroyed. I'm going to play it again. There's nothing left to the building. This was reactor, sorry about that. This was reactor 3. There's nothing left. It didn't sneeze out the fuel pool. It tossed it. And I do have the videos of those detonations. Just give me a moment. Maybe I can find them. The only problem is we've been at this for so long. We have gathered up so much material. I have an incredible memory, but unfortunately, we gathered up so much. I don't see it here right now. Just hang on, you never know with me. Okay, I don't see it. Now the reactor core has gone down into the earth of some of these sites. And so the whole site disappears in radioactive steam. And at 6 places, the steam coming out of the ground is 10 sieverts an hour. That's known as the China syndrome, where it hit the water tables, it split the earth, and then the fuel gets tossed around, some of it, and it's releasing steam constantly. So the whole site has to be evacuated, sometimes for extended periods. So nobody's really surprised by that statement.
Which in each case is damaged. Units 1 and 3, in fact, destroyed at that.
So now we say Unit 1 to 3 is destroyed. But if he said that at the beginning of the panel's presentation, he couldn't have said the other things he said. But that got introduced now because of the audience. Now, not all the audience is planted.
Location.
But you can see his demeanor changes completely a little ways into the show. At this part here, he doesn't want to look the audience in the face.
And Unit 4...
Now, he's got the other people on both sides of him as distractions and to support him, to prop him up, so to tell the evil lie.
Does not have fuel in its reactor, but its spent fuel pool is overheating and there has been some burning.
So now it just said reactor 4 was never had nothing in the reactor core. Well, actually, they don't. When they're changing the fuel in the reactor core, they only take out a chunk of it. They don't take it all out. So this is 720 tons we're talking about. So let's say they took out 400 tons. 300 tons is a silly, awful amount of fuel. So reactor 4, ultimately, well, the fuel pools were at the top of the building he's talking about. You can see the building over there where the guts are physically hanging out of the bottom ground floor of the building. There's nothing left of the building. The fuel pool was ejected. And if I could find those videos, I don't understand. They're always in the same spot, but I'm probably gone past it is what's... Problem is, I have an absurd collection of documentation about this subject because we cover it constantly, right? So just hang on. I find... Here you go. I think we got it. Yeah, we do. So this one, the first one I think is reactor 1. So reactor 1 is that way. Let's see. They seen this explosion themselves, right? For sure. So what blew up would look just like these rectangle reactors, which is the actual reactors. So the next one I'm going to show you, I'll get out of the picture, is the reactor 3 explosion. They unequivocally, because this picture was shot, video was on the media, and so was this one. This is the reactor 3 detonation. So this was now the fuel pool you can see going up, now we're starting to fall back down. The fuel pool, look at this, that's the actual reactor core and the fuel pool of reactor 3. And this is what it looked like after a couple of days later. Let me get rid of that. So it looked like that. And a couple of years later, they tore it off. And this is the remains of a 190-foot building. The reactor core and the fuel pools. So the reactor core would be right here in the building, and the fuel pools are just slightly above it in the top. These are at the top of the building. So there's no way that Gordo didn't know what you already know.
Fortunately, to date, the releases from these damaged reactor cores and spent fuel pools has been comparatively low.
And that's what that whole framing of that narrative was all about, so he could say that. That's why they call him. That's why Harvard is one of the most prestigious schools, because they're professional even at lying, right? So let's go back to that clip again.
And Unit 4 does not have fuel in its reactor, but its spent fuel pool is overheating and there has been some burning.
Some burning. You can't get some burning in a fuel pool without the whole fuel pool burning. Once it starts burning, it quickly goes from 1,500 degrees of zirconium cladding to 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit to plasma. So, like, if you can't trust the most prestigious universities on the planet to give you a straight answer and give you an incredibly, perfectly concocted cover story, which was mimicked
Fortunately,
worldwide.
to date, the releases from these damaged reactor cores and spent fuel pools has been comparatively low. I say comparatively because the level of radiation dose on the site has caused the removal of most of the workers from the site, and for a period in the last 24 hours, the removal of the remaining skeleton crew for several hours from the site. So the dose is significant. However, it is a tiny fraction of what the dose would be if a large release were to occur.
If it blew up like that, which it did, and reactor 1 or 2 and reactor 1. So he's claiming that hasn't happened yet, despite the fact that he's seen these explosions on TV before he done that. But the claim there wasn't a large release, this is France's model based on 16 days of radioactive fallout, but not based upon the buildings that I showed you. This is based on venting. Radiation covers the entire planet in 16 days. So Harvard, which has a major nuclear lobbying group embedded at the actual institution, so we don't even have an institution we can turn to for accuracy that's going to be honest. If you can't turn to Harvard University, what does that say about us as we have no future. We can't have a future if they're not free to speak. And you can tell by his demeanor, right, that I don't know if he doesn't seem to be enjoying, like a lot of these apologists, telling the lie. Like if you watch Dr. Geraldine Thomas from United Kingdom, when she's telling her version, she clearly enjoys telling the lie. He looks like he's afraid to go home. His wife is going to beat him or something.
And as every day passes, the level of radioactivity in the reactor cores declines.
The level of activity can't decline when the buildings were detonated. The level is gone all over the planet, right?
However, there is still sufficient activity that a fatal dose from plume exposure could still occur.
So anybody's not familiar, what James Lucid is saying, just a little venting in mild zirconium fires, he's making fun, right? He's not. He's trying to make light of it as a joke. He's well aware of what's going on. That's hilarious. Just a little venting and mild zirconium fires. Because that's what he's trying to employ, right? To anybody that's on the inside, we get that that's hilarious joke, right? But to anybody that's not familiar, that's pretty funny stuff. I try not to read the comments when I'm streaming because I'll get distracted or I'll start laughing because I get the humor right away, right? But I'm worried that a lot of people don't understand the humor that's going on. The majority of the people you're going to see in the comments section are extremely well versed in this topic. I mean it. They're comprehensible to me for sure, because they've followed this long enough. They're not naive, right? And Gordo here, he's not Gordon Thomas. He's not Thompson. He's not naive. He's just evil. But he doesn't look like a willing, evil participant.
A number of kilometers, perhaps 10 or more kilometers downwind. This is very weather deep. Passes, the level of radioactivity in the reactor cores declines. However, there is still sufficient activity that a fatal dose from plume exposure could still occur for a number of kilometers, perhaps 10 or more kilometers downwind. This is very weather dependent.
So his fatal dose is 10 kilometers away, but he starts off with...
as every day passes, the level of radioactivity in the reactor cores declines.
The level of radioactivity in the reactor cores decline, but there's fatal doses 10 kilometers downwind. But you might not die that day. You might die next month, right? But you got a fatal dose. You inhaled absurd, not gammas, he is in one context, and he did earlier acknowledge that you're originally going to get a whole body dose from X-rays from the plumes emitting X-rays, which is different gammas, neutrons, and alpha bursts.
When people speak of very small radiation doses, typically they're talking about readings at a far distance. And indeed, at far distances, radiation from this event has led to quite small increases in naturally occurring levels of radiation exposure.
He didn't answer her question, by the way, but I lost track of.
When people speak of very small radiation doses, typically they're talking about readings at a far distance.
Now also, because they invoked unisieverts, millisieverts, microsieverts and stuff. And millisieverts, there's 1,000 millisieverts for every, or 1,000 microsieverts for every millisievert. 1,000 unisieverts for every microsiever. And so it's designed, right, to make it look like it's millions of times insignificant. So, it's 1,000,000 times. It has to be 1,000,000 times more to be an effect on the human. That's the idea of those measurements, right? But if you get a single atom in your body, pulsing energy at the speed of light every second, your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells, and in increments over decades will turn it into a tumor. I think it's striking that these weasels don't have fur for a body.
And that's correct, but it's not helpful. We really should be focused at this time on the potentially very large and fatal exposures that could occur. If we focus on that, we can take the steps necessary to reduce the chance of such an occurrence as much as possible.
Well, first off, you got to admit that it happened. You got to admit that the buildings are destroyed like that. And you got to admit that then that's going to release the radioactive plumes. Harvard University, disarmed the population from being able to protect themselves, right? So this person's responsible for tens and hundreds of millions of people's illnesses and diseases because he refused to warn them. His job is he makes a lot of money every year, and then he'll get called upon to do something like this. So for most of his life, he does nothing, but then he gets called. His job is to come in and tell the cover story. And everybody else be damned, including his friends and families and loved ones.
Thank you. Next question, please.
My name is Naoko Miyake, a doctorate student studying at HSPH.
And so her job is she's not a moderator. She's not smart enough to know that that's a lie. She's not able to say, hang on a second, that's actually not true. and then bring in a reputable person to tell the
speech.
truth.
I have a question to Dr. Thompson. I would like to ask you about the inconsistency of information, especially about the recommendation from two governments, from the U.S. and Japan. U.S. Pentagon just released that the U.S. citizens should evacuate 80 kilometers away from the nuclear plant. However, the Japanese government is still insisting that 20 kilometers is enough. Which recommendation should the people should follow? And the second question actually goes to Dr. Leaning. Is there any support from HSPH on epidemiologist who is specialized in the natural disaster? We would like to ask for your help. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so some of these people in the audience are not part of this, right? And they need that to bring the authenticity, to make it makes it look real, right? But because they're asking the panel for a voice and for information, the panel's job is to just lie directly to that person, and by proxy lie to everybody else worldwide.
So, Gordon, Dr. Thompson?
In response to the question as to an appropriate evacuation distance, as I mentioned earlier, from this standpoint, right here in this room.
Now, this is where he's having pains of conscience. So he goes a lot, instead of just coming out and saying it, well, they should try to get on the other side of Tokyo. He goes about it without jeopardizing his position as a bootlicker.
It's not possible to make a specific recommendation. I'll repeat the general recommendation I made before, which is people at a considerable distance, perhaps 80 kilometers, if they have the opportunity to go to a much further distance, then it would be wise for them to do so.
Right. Now that's really interesting, because she said the recommendation is 20 kilometers. He said, well, try to get 80 kilometers, and if you can, go long distance, a lot further. That's what I call pains of conscience.
Until this situation is resolved. Closer to the plant.
Well, it's a nuclear meltdown. It's never going to be resolved.
At distance of perhaps 20, 30, 40 kilometers.
So within 20 or 30, 40 kilometers, up to 40 kilometers of the plant?
It's important to consider the status of the transport infrastructure. And if the infrastructure is severely damaged, it may not make sense for many people to attempt to move at that point. And I lack any information to speak further.
But he doesn't. He actually doesn't. But he just told him to get the frig out of Japan, basically, in a very roundabout way, because he recognizes that's a real victim there. That's not part of the pretend. I got another example here of what I mean by that. Hang on. It was from Simon Fraser University out in British Columbia. Let me see if I can find that very quick. There's never actually, I don't know why I used the word very quick, because I physically, literally can't do anything quick when it comes to this topic. If you're going to do it, you got to take your time, look for it, and then have that conversation, right? If it's not right there, and all of those videos. Well, there's another one after the WIP nuclear meltdown in the deep geological repository.
But I charge my iPhone every single night. I charge my iPad.
Now somebody asked her what was the problem with radiation. She talks about her iPhone and her iPhone charger as radiation.
Every single night. I touch that cord, I move that cord, I don't feel a tingle, I don't feel a shock. And if I licked that cord, it wouldn't hurt me.
So she's talking about licking her iPhone cord is like radioactive fallout. So if you don't feel dumb at that stage, you're doing pretty darn good. Okay, so this is the clip from Simon Fraser University. This person got $6 million from the nuclear industry a few weeks before this.
And living next to a nuclear power station can actually contribute less than your loved one when it comes to...
Let me play that clip.
Myself, as one of the principal investigators, was awarded $6 million.
So when he says you get a bigger dose sleeping next to somebody than living next to a nuclear power plant, he's got a whole list of standing in front of granite, a New York, Tokyo air flight, smoking 30 cigarettes a day, cosmic radiation, radiation from the ground, radon, natural radiation. And now what was interesting about this is the reaction of the audience. Obviously the audience, like typically you would expect an audience not to know much about the subject, so they come there to learn. So when he says you get a bigger dose sleeping next to somebody than next to a nuclear power plant, the audience can't contain it any longer and they blow up laughing.
And living next to a nuclear power station can actually contribute less than your loved one when it comes to...
So you get a bigger dose sleeping next to somebody than you do from being next to a nuclear power plant, which are hemorrhaging radiation all the time from the fuel pools. And most nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. Try wrapping your mind around that statement. The audience laughed because they were part of it. Right? This was Simon Fraser University in British Columbia.
This is the decision dilemma.
Now, some people in this audience wasn't part of the in crowd, and they were probably wondering why everybody was laughing. Because you have to know what's going on to find it funny. And you got to be some kind of sadistic, detached creature to actually find it funny, sadly, on top of that.
This is the decision dilemma, that if you order an evacuation closer to the plant and there is a significant, massive release, then you have all these people on the road who are not sheltered at all. And they can't move because the transport doesn't work or there's gridlock with traffic. And here they are out in the open with a plume going over them. So the question is, where do you ask people to evacuate and how far distant? And then in the closer range, perhaps the best thing to do would be shelter in their houses, which is, an option, maybe the only option.
Like sheltering in your house. Okay, so, think about if you live alongside, and heaven forbid, you live alongside of a chemical weapons manufacturing facility, and they have a plume. Now, would you find sheltering in your house comforting? No. Are you going to get a brutal dose by staying in your house for an extended period in a nuclear wasteland than you would if you just went through the plume to get out of there? I'm assuming you would. I'm assuming it's better to run away than stay there and shelter where your air, like the toxicity, the amount of atoms per cubic meter is just petrifying.
But then you hit the points that Dr. VanRooyen is saying, which is, how are you going to resupply all these tens of thousands of people that are sheltering in their homes?
Like the nuclear industry is actually crazy. If you live within 10 miles of a nuclear power plant, if you can hear the sirens, which are typically within 10 miles of a nuclear power plant, You're about 100 miles too close. They're always releasing radioactivity. It's a slow kill, but it will get you. There's no maybes about this.
Yes. Hi, I'm Robin Herman. I'm director of the forum, and I'm asking a question on behalf of someone who is following our event through the Reuters.com blog that is blogging this live right now. This person asked, and there are a number of other people who have asked the same thing, are concerned about possible water contamination. Is drinking water going to be safe? Would fish or seaweed consumption be safe or become risky because of this situation? And what is the impact on the food chain? What is the possible impact on the food chain?
Thank you. Dr. Thompson.
Part of emergency response in an incident like this is to take a very careful look at the food chain and then interdict it where necessary to keep contaminated food away from human consumption. That's not an immediate priority, particularly because the earthquake and the tsunami have interrupted local farming and fishing. That's a matter that should be attended to, but I think if I were in the decision tree, I'd be focusing on more immediate issues right now and get to that one perhaps a week or two out.
Well, they never stopped growing the food. 55 countries banned the food from 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima. And Canada lifted all restrictions after 93 days, so Japan had nowhere else to ship it, so they poisoned all of Canada.
Thank you. Yes, please, question.
Dr. Thompson, I'm Sven Youngman, studying with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine.
Now, just to remind you that they originally, it was 2000, late 2011, the end of 2000, or beginning of 2012, where they put a limit of 500 becquerels a kilogram of just cesium. They didn't look for the other isotopes, folks. And they gave the farmers broken Geiger counters and told the farmers to check the food themselves. In late 2012, they dropped it from 500 becquerels a kilogram to 100 becquerels a kilogram. But by then, obviously, it's too late, right? Because they're growing almost 1 billion pounds of rice alone just in that single prefecture each year. And they shipped it worldwide. And Japan done everything it could to destroy the health of everybody worldwide. They should go back to the old days where they went in and firebombed the country. Unfortunately, the people are innocent, right? But it makes you so angry at what they got done to the planet. It's easy to take it out on the country, but it's not the people's fault. It's the nuclear industry, the universities, the media, and the captured regulatory agencies and the government's fault. But it's heartbreaking because you're seeing everybody around you get sick and die.
Yes, please, question.
Dr. Thompson, I'm Sven Youngman, studying with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, doing a master's in public health too. What I've learned so far is the problem with the Fukushima nuclear plant is that it is overheating and there is a lack of clean water to cool it down. So, and obviously salt water is not adequate either because
sulfur.
In this environment of high pressure, it would actually cause further explosions. Can you tell us something about possible attempts?
Further explosions? Well, yeah, the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs are created by spraying, and they knew this during nuclear bomb testing in the Bikini Islands and Christmas Island and the French Polynesian Islands, that the sulfur becomes a spherical balls that are able to ingest the particles and become super hot particles that are very mobile and very energetic and are lethal to everything with replicating cells. So he's part of the university. They're going to introduce what salt water means.
to find alternative ways of cooling down the reactors?
The use of seawater for cooling indicates that all freshwater supplies have been lost. There are large tanks on site, and the site would be connected to municipal water suppliers. All of that has been lost, as evidenced by the use of seawater. The use of seawater will ensure that the plants cannot be used again in the future, but it also introduces complications, because if you're in a boiling situation, you'll have a lot of salt crystallization, and you'd expect after a period of time, you'd start to jam up valves and the like with salt crystals. So it's an indication of being in a really dire situation with very poor alternatives. I would assume that the authorities are thinking about stabilization of the site, which will be a concern even if we're lucky and no big release occurs.
Again, the release occurred. Again, the buildings are completely destroyed. The water was that they're spraying on it was to pacify the population of the planet, to deceive and manipulate them into thinking that the nuclear industry, which is an incredible coward, was on it. The nuclear industry never went to the site, folks. No academics, no nuclear scientists have never went to this site. No nuclear universities, no nuclear companies have ever went to the site. It's the homeless, the destitute, the victims of society, immigrants who don't speak the language. There was no one there at the point they were talking about, because by that day, the site had detonated reactor cores all around the site. The plumes were covering the entire planet. This is day 4 after the plume. The plume now was actually across the Pacific Ocean. Now was inundating the North America. I find it, even though I've been at this for a long time, I'm still shocked by how people will sell their souls for a job. They'll sell out everybody, they'll murder everybody on the planet by this deception to keep a job. And they got an incredible education. They can get a job anywhere and probably make better money. But they get sucked into this death cult, and they can't seem, like his demeanor, where the rest of them don't have that issue. You see, he keeps his face down, he keeps his eyes down for the most part. He'll look up once in a while. That's him struggling. But
stabilization will be a challenge for weeks and months to come.
Stabilization.
And that will require, among other things, bringing in barges. Because
bringing in
the transport
barges of fresh water.
Damaged, so barges will need to come in carrying fresh water and heavy equipment.
By sea, you mean?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because the infrastructure was washed out for 680 kilometers.
And I hope that thought is being given to that phase.
Could I just follow up?
Well, see, like, they're not going to come up with solutions because you just told a whole bunch of lies and said there's no need to. Right? This is what I mean. Harvard says there's no need for this intervention. There's no urgency to their stories, see? Despite the fact that this was recorded on the 16th and published on the 18th. So this is 4 days after detonations of nuclear reactors started. This was the most vital time. This was the most important moments. This was the make or break moments. And they made sure that there was no way that the world could come up with solutions. If Japan had asked for solutions, the world would have came up with solutions. The world would have came up with solutions. Countries would have volunteered resources. We should have sacrificed 1 million nuclear scientists. Should have lost their lives at Fukushima, is the reality of it.
Here's a decision question. What would you do if you were in charge of what must happen? And what do you mean by stabilization?
Well, these reactors can't be stabilized. They were already destroyed. the right thing to do was now to go in and deal with the China syndromes.
Let me answer the stabilization question first. That's keeping the cores and the spent fuel pools filled with water.
Well, you can't fill up a pool with water when the fuel pools don't exist. They don't exist. There's the evidence. And they knew that. And they seen the videos of the detonations I showed you just a little while ago. They knew the fuel pools didn't exist anymore. Reactor 1, Reactor 3, and Reactor 4, it's blatantly obvious. And Reactor 2, it's blatantly obvious if you're a nuclear scientist like Gordo Thompson is. It's blatantly, it's mind-numbingly easy to deduct it. He should be tried for crimes against humanity.
For the months and years during which cleanup will require.
For the months and years.
And in a stable situation, you will not be relying upon skid-mounted diesel pumps and fire hoses drawing from the ocean. That's can be at most a very short-term solutions, very problematic, as I described earlier. So that's the stabilization challenge. The on-site emergency response challenge is to take actions that involve very high worker exposure. And often they're ad hoc. They're jury-rigged solutions made up on the spot. They clearly, if you have fire trucks and skid-mounted diesel pumps and hoses, you're in an operating environment that was never contemplated. There was never any rehearsal for it.
Look, look at this picture. The tsunami ran through the nuclear site. There was no infrastructure left. 3 sieverts, he says, is a lethal dose, right? Outside of Reactor 1 was 1 million sieverts at this point. So there was no way, even if you did have the equipment, to be able to use it.
I do not know the practice or the regulatory practice in Japan. In the United States, there is a provision for worker exposure up to 25 rem in emergency and 75 rem to conduct life-saving activity in an emergency. It's quite a substantial dose, a 75 rem dose. It's not yet in the fatal range, but you could expect morbidity and life shortening. But that is a provision in US regulations, and typically volunteers would be requested for that.
Volunteers would be requested instead of volunteering the victims, like the homeless and the destitute, the victims of society. So there's 680 kilometers of the coastline look like this. So there was no infrastructure. There's no where to plug something in. There's no telephone poles.
Hi, my name is Aya Yamamoto, and I'm a first-year master's student in EPI. And my question is, if in an emergency situation in which the radiation levels become harmful to humans, is the current communication infrastructure in Japan sufficient to reach the citizens in proximity to the power plant?
Excellent question.
Right, so this is people got loved ones they're concerned about. This is why Gordo got his eyes down and why the other 2 goblins don't.
Question. Professor Reich, communication systems.
The short answer is, I have no idea.
Because he's talking to a victim face to face, and he's finding it hard to lie.
And typically what would happen is there would be trucks driving around with loudspeakers on them. And so then the question is, well...
Right, so typically, but how are you going to drive a truck around in a nuclear wasteland like that for 680 kilometers?
How much has the roads been damaged, and either by the earthquake or by the water damage? Then you get to, well, is there electricity and can people listen to radios? Or can you get to or internet is not working well in those areas. So it is a real problem if you have people diffuse in their own homes, as opposed to if they're in specific centers. That makes the communication somewhat easier.
Dr. VanRooyen.
Okay, so here's the last clip.
The closing message is that this is a terrible set of tragedies that would challenge any government and any people in the world. And to the people of Japan and to the government of Japan, we really send our deeply heartfelt sympathy to everything that is going on there.
No, you don't. You just lied for an hour and 5 minutes.
And at the same time, we are here ready to provide whatever assistance might be asked for.
No, you're not. You just downplayed every facet of the accident, and so you took away the ability to treat it realistically. You wouldn't have to wait for them to ask if you were honest. You would look at it and say, well, they're going to need this stuff. Let's get it on the go. They're in a position to do things that the average people can't, right? They're the schools of mass destructions themselves on top of that.
And that's at the technical level, at the social level, at the personal level.
He should be shipped to Japan, and the Japanese people should skin him alive, as far as I'm concerned.
I think it requires the Japanese to figure out how we can best assist them.
Right, now let's put the onus on the victims, right? They're the university. If they don't know, who the fuck does know? Excuse the language. I apologize.
In confronting this terrible...
Someone needs to confront that terrible, disgusting betrayal. That's a revolting betrayal. Shame on them. But hey, that's the nuclear industry, Dana. What do you expect? I know, I'm just saying. Harvard University is not somebody that you want to go and get your information from. Just imagine that statement. Just try to wrap your mind around that statement. I know a thinker asked me in the comments earlier, would I live on the West Coast again? The answer is no. Zero possibility because of the plume. How's our poll doing? Because that's the end of it. With a legacy of endless lies, can the perpetually evil nuclear industry ever be trusted? And 94% got it right. A couple of people accidentally hit yes, I guess. 94% got it right. No, they can't be trusted. How can you trust something so evil? They're such abusive. These institutions are the most abusive thing in human history. They've destroyed everybody's future. You notice I got Fukushima radioactive fallout is global warming. What I mean by that is these invisible plumes you can't perceive, you can't see it or smell it or touch it or hear it or feel it or pick it up or throw rocks at it. This invisible plume covers the entire planet. This model is only 20 days. It covers the whole planet, a continuous plume from the ocean floor to the upper troposphere and higher. It's pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. And this was the catalyst, the overdrive catalyst for climate change and everything else. But decades, 75, 80 years of nuclear being released into the environment, all fuel pools are hemorrhaging millions. Each fuel pool has decades of reactor cores that are still split in the atom. The same amount of atoms they normally split to boil water are now just released directly into the environment. It pulses energy every second. It attacks the most vulnerable species The base is the food chain, the base is the oxygen chain, the base is the carbon sequestering chain first, and then everything else after. It's a death cult, and the industry knows it. They're not stupid. They're 100% not stupid. We had some donations. Stephen Young donated $50 last week. Bless you, Stephen. I hope you're not donating in reference to my phone bill being $185. I'm going to call them up tomorrow and find out why my bill jumped like that. And because you're welcome to call me anytime, and same with everybody else. And by the way, I appreciate it because we do need the donations. Obsolete Optics donated $123. Thank you again. That's amazing timing. And Gregory C donated $10. And this is awesome because we're at a crunch point in this year where we got huge bills. We got breakdowns. We got the boat needs to be fixed. That's going to have to wait. I got to replace the drums and the brakes on my truck. Hauling the trailers and the boats around over the years killed everything on the truck, right? I can't afford to do it, so I'm not. But I got to replace the brakes, even though the drums got to be replaced. So the brakes will cost me $70 or $80. The drums will cost $120 each, right? So later on, maybe we raise enough money, I'll redo everything again. But I heard the brakes yesterday, and I was like, I got out and had a look, and I was like, oh, shit. How did I miss that one? Because normally you change the brakes before they start eating your drum, right? And I generally check it every 6 months, but I missed it. And now I got damage on the drums. And they don't machine the drums anymore. You got to buy new ones. So I can't do that right now, but I'll have to replace the brakes on it. It's just one of the many more expenses that just creeps up on you. We got to get the truck and the trailer and the boat trailer and the flat deck trailer registered for another year. The site is coming up in 9 days. Is another $331. That takes priority. So the money that we got raised is going to have to go for that first. And whatever. We got other expenses that has snuck up on me. The boat needs it needs a throttle idle valve. They're $300 or something. And the season has just started. Summer just showed up today, so the season's officially here. And the thought of not being able to get out and do research expeditions, I can't get used to that. That thought freaks me out. Let me show you why. And it should freak you out too. The research expeditions are unbelievably important because you're able to, I'll give you a demonstration here quickly. I wasn't intending to, but. So we've done research expeditions for years on the West Coast from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. And blah, 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 blah. And so what we discovered was the species are exterminated on the West Coast. Now we're seeing the same thing on the Atlantic. So that's a huge, getting out on the ocean and doing research, because we're able to prove now this is an extinction event because of the research. And so missing the research for a single year is devastating. And I'm currently, well, I never was very healthy, was I? But I'm currently not doing good at all. But we still have to do the work because nobody else is doing it. I know Kevin is up during the tidal pools right now, but he doesn't. He's not able to show you the other pictures, unfortunately. So it should look like that where Kevin's too, not just on British Columbia and Alaska. Down where Kevin's to, it should look like to the left. It's exterminated. So we've done this 6 different years, that research. And I'm just saying, to me, it's super important that I get out on the ocean again this year, right? We got mass bird die-offs, and we were waiting for the weather to break. The weather just broke, and I still haven't got the boat operational, and we can't even fund it with fuel. And so this operation is struggling to survive. It's struggling. We need a few people to step up, and we need to raise a few $1,000s to get ahead of everything. And instead, we're just, anything we can manage to scrape together is just covering the most important facets that got to get covered immediately. So we're struggling, and we're good. This operation is good. This is a good for Earth. What we do is important. What we do is necessary. What we do tells the story. What we do, nobody else is doing. What's, how can we let that, the industry's done this to me on purpose, where they took down my site with 24,000 subscribers while I was out on a bird expedition, insect expedition. So I'm heartbroken that I can't keep up with the expenses, and that jeopardizes everything, right? My pension every year for over a decade, every extra nickel has to go into this operation. I never have anything extra. It's simply not, and I'm not even healthy, right? And there's no I'm not talking about people that support me. I'm talking about the foundations, the universities out there should have been doing this, but they should at least support people like me that are doing the research. There's no foundations supporting me. And so we checked out all the foundations that would normally support me. They've been taken over by the industries. These are controlled oppositions. And so the future of the planet is not very good, because the industry has taken over most of the opposition and is now controlled opposition. It's captured all the regulatory agencies. But I still have to try. I still have to plead and ask and hope that there are people, and there's 2 links in the bottom of my description every show that are the only 2 ways you can donate to me. The second one at my site will literally take any kind of credit card or Google card or Apple card or you name it from anywhere on the planet. If you put that number in, my card, the system that I'm using, this national institution, has capabilities for most of that. But I have such a small audience for the most important topic in human history. And that's not by accident, that's by design. And so this site here, the most views I've ever got on a single video is maybe 1,400. That's absurdness after 9-10 months on this new site. It's complete absurdness. Backstabbing friends of the earth. James Lucet. Hi, James. Thank you, my friend. I love the humor, man. Keep it up. Kevin Blanche. Kevin has no pension. Well, I mean, I got a pension and I use it, right? If I didn't have a pension, I wouldn't be at this period because I wouldn't be able to keep it up. Richard McCann, thinker. Obsolete again, thank you. Ryan Underwood. But I mean, I can't just stop this operation because I can't fund it. This operation wouldn't exist if I thought that way, right? Is all I'm saying. I keep funding away. People keep donating in increments. We'll keep it working. But we should be able to expand it, is what I'm saying. I should be able to hire people to go out and do the research and report in from ground zero. I should be the coordinator. I should have a huge foundations donating and helping me run this operation, but they can't be trusted. It's heartbreaking. James Megan, Colette's out there somewhere. Stephen Young is out there somewhere. Because they always, I know they're going to be watching it today or tomorrow. Same with Swanee D. He's always been there. And I don't like, just because I don't see these people regularly, I still know they're there and I have to acknowledge them. Jeffrey Brown, Richard McCann. Darlene, John Curtis. Hugs for everybody. God bless everybody. Chet Austin, have a great night, great day tomorrow. Jeffrey Brown. Anybody I missed, my apologies. I'm going to end the poll here in a second. I'm just looking for shout-outs for tonight for those who happen to be in the comment sections. Hi to everybody that's watching this, is not in the comment, is watching this later. It's just something I like to do at the end of the show to switch off. Dana Nasana, of course. Dana, thank you again. We got an update on the DC-8s in Montreal, so that's a huge deal. Pentalim, Ayers, like I've worked very hard to build this site and my following. It's an organic following. I've done it myself. I work like a dog. I sacrificed everything and I built a tiny following. I worked very hard to get 4 people on my show when I start my show 5 days a week. Chet Austin. And I'm overwhelmed that the world sits in silence. I'm heartbroken that the world sits in silence. John Coleman. Peaceware. Anybody I missed, my apologies. Adam the Mushroom. Just going back up to the name. We're going to bring up the poll here for the last time right now. Here we go. With a legacy of endless lies, can the perpetually evil nuclear industry be trusted? And the right answer, of course, is no. We only got 49 votes. We only got 46 thumbs up for a Sunday show. It's extremely unusual. So Kevin Blanche is right by saying kettling, because he's been kettled worse than anybody I've ever seen. Let's end the poll. We'll call it a night. Tank's obsolete. Richard. Peace where I got everybody today. David Allen. See, I always miss somebody. I appreciate everybody. That's right, obsolete. Heartbroken and distraught. And that's why we go to war 5 days a week. I used to do it 7 days a week for years, but I had to take a few days off. If I'm researching, then I won't be doing shows, but if I'm not researching, then I'm here to kick the shit out of the nuclear industry. I think they should all be publicly hung for what they done. It's unconscionable to poison everybody on the planet and lie about it the way they've done for 70 odd years. Have a great night, great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. I already got tomorrow night's show wrapped up and ready. It's a fantastic show. And there's a study just came out showing women in Japan have a huge white blood cell count. It's downplayed, but it's... Yeah, good night, folks. Take care. Throw them in a wood chipper. That's right. Take care, folks. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Yeah, thanks, Richard. Good night, everybody.